So welcome back to another episode. And yes, it is my top 10 worst controllers episode. Controllers that I really try to like. And in a lot of ways, I like some of these, but there's other aspects of them that I just couldn't get with the program. I will ask you guys down below, what is a controller that you do not like? You hate it. In fact, it's a controller that you bought and you thought, this is going to be great. You tried it out and you're like, nope, this is not for me. All of these picks today are first-party controllers from the companies themselves, except I'm doing one exception. I am doing one exception today because I spent so many hours using this controller. Should I call it a controller? We'll get to it for sure. So let us start at the beginning here. And I've made a lot of jokes about it. Realistically, the controller works really, really well. It's just so damn big. Oh my god, I need a little bit of help lifting this up. Here we go. It is the Xbox original controller, also known as the Duke. Yeah, because you need Dukish arms to lift this up. I'm telling you. And this is what I call overkill. It's gigantic. I mean, even for me, right now, this is a heck of a thing to put your hands around. Absolutely. It's crazy. But it's a good controller, and I liked it at the time. I first played Halo with it, and I thought, this is pretty cool. I like the analogs, the D-pads, a little bit suspect. You can't miss these, man. They're just right there. But this controller just misses the mark for me. It's just a kind of ridiculously oversized controller. It's like, here's the Xbox. It's a giant console. Here's a giant controller as well. It's kind of like one of those American things where you just build the biggest car possible just to kind of show it off. But here we go. This is it. They redesigned it with the S controller, which is a controller I like a lot better, but this is funny, and you know what? We all love making fun of the Duke. Okay, this is the one that's not first party. I have talked about it on the show before, but I had to include it in this top 10 list here. Oh my god, are you ready for this? Are you ready for this? The ASCII Keyboard Controller. This was released for Fantasy Star Online 1 and 2 in Japan, and I imported that game, so I had to get the keyboard. This was the only way to get a keyboard without going with a third-party device that you had to get to hook up a regular keyboard. And I honestly, at first, I was sold on it. I thought, this is great. I can't wait to control it and use a keyboard because you need to talk to people in the game, you need to communicate. But it's ridiculous. And let's just take this out because you have to see it. The power of editing. Here we go. Look at this thing. Hi everybody, I'm playing a video game. This is really weird. The keys were very, very small as well. Gotta show you that. It's an interesting idea. I understand where they were coming from. They grabbed a GameCube controller, cut it in half, and just put in a giant keyboard in the middle and said, hey, get on with it. I'm sure it'll work just fine. And I used this for quite a bit of time, but the great news was you didn't have to just use the GameCube controller here and keyboard. I could just put it down and use it as a keyboard and have my wireless Wavebird as well to play the game, and then I would type on this. But what a ridiculous, outlandish idea that was good on paper. In execution, just very, very silly. But what a novelty item, and it's been a lot of fun to talk about over the years. Okay, the next controller is a controller that I am very nostalgic for. I have a lot of nostalgia for it, and it did the job. I like the VMUs that went in it, but the controller itself is very, very awkward, and that is the Dreamcast Controller. Yes, blasphemy, I know. I like the Dreamcast more than anybody. I love seeing the machine. I like having the controller, and it works, but it just feels a little bit weird. It never felt like a controller that I was really comfortable with. It was one I could pick up, I could play the games, no problem, but I would have preferred a different controller for sure. And the design is nostalgic, right? The design is amazing, and it's the last Sega controller to come from a console. And so this was a hard one for me to do, but it was one of those ones that I was always like, this controller's a bit weird for me. I never could get down to the program of absolutely falling in love. I fell in love with it nostalgically, design-wise. It's a bit of a weird controller there, that's for sure. Okay, another controller that I got day one with the console. I got home and I started to play it and I thought, this is the future of gaming. And to play the initial game was incredible. A game that changed the way we played video games in 3D. And that is, I know a lot of you will be like, what? The Nintendo 64 controller. Why? Why would I be against this? Because it's so unusual. I'm like, do I play it this way? Do I play it this way? There's many different ways to use the controller, and I don't think that both of those were perfectly ideal. This was okay for fighting games. These buttons were a little bit small for my liking. Like, look at this. It's a little bit tiny going on here. The analog was awesome. It really was neat to play Mario and run him around in a 3D world. But you know, coming off Mario 64 and then playing some other games, this felt really cheap. And that's the thing that I want to say about the Nintendo 64 controller that gets me the most. It does feel very cheap, like a kid's toy, and it doesn't feel like a really strong controller. And I get that, and listen, I know a lot of you out there love this controller, and I do too, for the nostalgia and what it means. I love seeing it. It brings back so many memories, and I enjoyed playing it, but it never felt completely right. And that's what I'm saying. It never felt completely right. It's not like one of those controllers I'm like, I really want to see this design again. Going forward, I certainly do not, but a lot of nostalgia there for sure. Okay, I can already hear it. 1,000 Smash players out there scream out in the darkness when I bring up this controller. Again, I feel like I'm picking on Nintendo a little bit because they were so revolutionary with so many controllers, and they really gambled on a lot of different design choices. And you know what? Some of them work, and some of them kind of work, and some of them really don't. This is one of those ones that it never really worked for me 100%. And I'm going to describe why here. I think for anybody who plays Smash and is really good with the controller, they grew up with this and they love it. But for me, my problem is I'm a fighting game fan, right? Look at this D-pad. It's so tiny. It's just so tiny to use, and these buttons never felt right. I'm kind of used to like the Super Nintendo and even the Genesis 6-button controller, where the buttons were at least uniform. I'd always be hitting the wrong buttons. Like, where's this one? Is this that button? Oh, this is this button. It never felt perfect for me. And this yellow analog here, this never worked for me. It was just so dumb and cheap, and it never worked, this controller, at all for me. I tried, man. I tried, and hey, I finished so many games using this controller. And then, yes, I got the Wavebird, and I've even said the only thing that was going for the Wavebird was it was wireless. And so that's why I really embraced the Wavebird, because of the wireless functions. But the GameCube controller was a novel experience. It worked, and I can see why a lot of people like it. But for me, I didn't. It was Tuesday. Now, the next one is an interesting one because I had a friend of mine who's unfortunately his parents had divorced, and his dad would shower him every weekend he went to stay with him with gifts. And so my friend had every single Nintendo game at the time and every single peripheral, and it was ridiculous. So when I would go over to his house, I was amazed by all the latest Nintendo Entertainment System toys that I had never seen, controllers and such. And he had this one, the Nintendo Entertainment System Max controller here, the NES Max. And he said to me, this is the future of controllers. This is the newest model. And I was like, really? And look at this right in here. It's just, this did not work for me at all. I had just learned how to use a D-pad, and all of a sudden you're like, no, you got to use this thing now. And it just swirls around, and I really disliked that a lot, and this felt very cheap and very small, and I was not very good at playing action games with it at all, and so I hated this controller, but my friend was pretty good. He really enjoyed this, and he probably still to this day would say this is one of his favorite NES controllers from his childhood. But for me, absolutely not. Okay, this is fascinating. The console that I hate the most, the one that I detest the most, also has a controller that I hate the most as well. Go figure. How would that happen? And that is for the 3DO controller by Panasonic right here. This thing is an absolute disaster. And why it is, the D-pad is not bad, but we only have 3 buttons here. And at this time, other machines had better button layouts and had more buttons going on for it. But the big thing that drove me crazy is the console only had 1 input for a controller. So what if you want to play a 2-player game? Where does the second player plug their game into? They can't plug it into the console. That's right. That's right. Look at here. On top, say this is a controller from another player, you click it in here. That's how another player plays with you. So you're playing, with the second player, and they're plugged into your controller. What? That I hated it. I hated it, and I just didn't like any of the 3DO controllers at the time. And I had like Samurai Showdown for it, and Super Street Fighter Turbo. None of it worked for me, and I hated the 3DO controllers. I get the heebie-jeebies when I see anything related to the 3DO. Yes, it had a few classic games on it, but the controllers were not the interface to get to those games. That's for sure. We're getting to some more here, and yes, some more bad news. More bad news because it's more Nintendo controllers. And I lined up at 3 in the morning for this machine. I was so excited. I was so excited for the future of video gaming. And then at 9 o'clock in the morning, when I was able to be let in to the store, I picked this up, I went home. Actually, I went home, dropped it off, went to work, came back, 11 at night. I got to play the future of video games. Yes, that's a long silence. It's like I'm mourning a death. I'm mourning the death of a real controller. Because I remember people at the time going, this is amazing. It's like they split the controller and it feels so free to play. And I'm like, this feels like work. It feels like work. I mean, this is something for another activity altogether. This is not for video gaming. And I know, remember you had to flick it this way and use this controller this way? I hated the Wii controls here, the waggle controls here. I hated these with a passion. I never liked them. I could never get with the program. Absolutely horrendous. But it sold incredibly well, and everybody loved bowling with it. They all loved bowling with it. I was not one of those people. I was like, oh boy, this is the best we have. Even when we got to Skyward Sword, I'm like, no, I'm out. And this could actually be argued as the worst one for me. It's nearly up there. I know a lot of nostalgic memories from a lot of you out there playing it, Wii bowling and all that, but not for me, man. This was too far away from what I liked, and it made every other controller look like $1 million compared to it, but it was accessible to a gigantic part of the population that weren't really into video games. That's how they brought them in. But for a lot of us that liked regular gaming, this was not the way to go. Okay. This controller is a controller I dislike so much that I don't even own. I've never even owned the machine. I played it one time back in, oh my god, the 90s. And I played it in the back of a store. I played Alien vs. Predator, and that game was pretty good. But the controller, I remember looking at it going, what is this? Even for this kind of review of old controllers, I went to so many video game stores that I know in Vancouver. Nobody had one. I was like, hey, can I rent it off you? Nope, nobody had one. They were all gone. And back in the day, I didn't even know anybody to have the system or have the controller. And that is for the Atari Jaguar. Yes, that machine that came out, nobody bought, and then you look at the controller, and the controller is a disaster of epic proportions. What is that? What is this? What is with all these buttons? I remember they had overlays for different games on over these buttons, and I'm like, okay, I always am one for wanting more, buttons in the controller. I think that's cool, but this is insanity. What is this? How many buttons is overkill? This many. And so I am not a fan of the Jaguar controller. I can only show a picture of it right here, unfortunately. Maybe it's fortunate. I don't even want to own that thing. I mean, it'd be taking up way too much space as is for what it is, and I don't even want to look at it. It's one of those moments in gaming that was very low. The 3DO was very low for me. The Jaguar was very low for me. And I was like, oh my god, gaming is going a very bad direction here. Because it just seemed it was being done by people who had no idea what they were doing and what, they didn't know what gamers wanted. And so, not a fan of that. Okay, this is interesting. I'm being a little hard here because I said the waggle controls could have been definitely number one. I'm being a little tough here. Number one. Oh my god, it's a Nintendo console again. I know, everybody's like, John, you love Nintendo. And I do. I'm not saying that they're a perfect company by any stretch of the imagination, that every console release has been an incredible thing. And I gotta say, I liked the console. Console design was a little boring, but I liked the games. The games were great. And it came with a regular controller, which was good, so you could play that way. But my god, and the Wii U Controller right here. It's heavy. I didn't know what to make of this. And I'm not saying anything, but Nintendo was always a big innovator with their controllers, and like them or not, they were always innovating. This was like, what is this? This is a touchpad? Is this, like, I didn't know what this was, and it was like this big screen. It felt heavy. It felt clunky. It felt like, I'm being honest here, it felt like I was going to work. Every time I was picking this thing up, I'm like, okay, here we go. What are we doing? What's happening? And the D-pad is okay. It kind of feels a little bit like this. It's just a little too big. Look at the size comparison on these two. It's a big controller. And yeah, man, I did not like this at all. Also, the battery just felt like we'd plug it in, charge it, we'd play using it for, it felt like a couple of hours, it was dead. I remember Kim playing so many games, plugging it in, having to sit next to the TV while it charged. Not a fan of this. But in this, there's something fascinating. This didn't work. And it didn't work for a lot of people. It didn't work for me. It was interesting to see the other screen on the bottom and all that. That's fine and dandy and all that. But this was the beginning. This was the failure that would grant success to the Nintendo Switch. This idea of taking a game handheld away, and you could play it here. You could play Earthbound and take it away. That was kind of a cool thing. But the Nintendo Switch was able to build on this terrible idea and work forward and do such great things with it. And the Nintendo Switch from this, it's like night and day. But this had to happen in a way to get the Nintendo Switch. And to be honest with you, I could really have lived without this. And I remember having a bit of a party over here, having a few friends over, and even Rob came over for the Wii U launch party that I had here. We actually had a Wii U launch party, and I remember Rob was the most hardcore Nintendo fan ever. He really is, like me. We love Nintendo. And he came over, and I said, oh, like afterwards, I'm like, are you going to get one? He's like, no, I think I'll wait a while. He was not sold, and that was like, oh my god, if Rob's not interested in this, then there's something's going on. And a bit of a misstep for Nintendo here, but would later on, go on to create the Nintendo Switch and, the phoenix out of the fire that is this right here. And I'll ask you guys, what are some controllers out there that you absolutely hate? I know, I went through a whole bunch today, and I was just very honest about what I thought about them over the years. Yes, some of them have some ups and downs, some of them are not the worst of the worst, but some of them weren't that great at the time, and I had to talk about them. So what is a controller that you absolutely hate? Let me know down below. So anyways, guys, until next time.